Picture this. You're in a meeting. 8 people around a table and someone just pitched a plan. Everyone's nodding. Not slow, thinking nods. Fast ones. The kind that happened before the sentence is even finished. You have a doubt. A real one, the kind you'd bring up if you were alone with just one of these people. But you look around the table first, and every face already looks settled, decided, comfortable. So, you do the thing almost everyone does in that exact moment. You keep the doubt to yourself, and you nod too. Nobody pressured you. Nobody said a word. Your hand just never went up. Now scale that same small moment up. Put it in a room with a president in it or a board of directors, a launch team with a countdown already running. Same silence. Same settled faces. Just higher stakes on the other side of the door. That small, quiet moment has a name, and it has sunk invasions, escalated wars nobody could win. Put a space shuttle in the air that should never have left the ground. Psychologists call it groupthink. Not groupthink. 2 words describing what a group does. 1 word, naming a specific way a group's thinking breaks. Here's the part almost nobody gets right about it, though, so let's fix that before we go any further. The word didn't come from a psychologist at all, and the real definition is more specific than the internet version. It's not just a group agreeing too much. It's what happens when a group's own desire to get along becomes so strong that it overrides their honest, realistic look at the actual options in front of them. The agreement isn't the problem. What it's covering up is a writer named William H. White coined groupthink in Fortune magazine in 1952. He built it on purpose to sound like another word, doublethink, from George Orwell's 1984. Same shape, same warning underneath. A mind that stopped checking its own conclusions. For 20 years, that was all it was. A sharp turn of phrase. Then, in 1972, a research psychologist named Irving Janis picked the word back up and did something nobody had done with it. He turned it into an actual theory, built from a real disaster. Janis had been reading through accounts of the Bay of Pigs. In 1961, roughly 1,400 CIA-trained Cuban exiles landed on a beach in Cuba, meant to spark an uprising against Fidel Castro. President Kennedy's own advisors had unanimously approved the plan. Nobody in that room had raised a serious objection. The invasion collapsed in 3 days. What stopped Janis cold wasn't that the plan failed. Plans fail. What stopped him was who'd approved it. This wasn't a handful of amateurs guessing. It was some of the sharpest foreign policy minds in the country, looking at a plan with obvious holes in it, somehow not seeing the holes. So Janis went digging for the mechanism, and he didn't stop at one case. He lined the Bay of Pigs up against Pearl Harbor, the slow escalation of the Vietnam War, the decision to push past the 38th parallel during the Korean War. Different decades, different administrations, different enemies entirely. What he was hunting for wasn't a bad president or a bad plan. It was whatever those rooms had in common. He defined groupthink as what happens when a group's desire for agreement gets so strong it overrides their own honest judgment about the situation in front of them. Not stupidity, not a lack of information. A group actively, unknowingly trading accuracy for harmony. He wrote it up in 1972 in a book called Victims of Groupthink, and widened it a decade later into a second edition that folded in Watergate. But a label and a shared thread across 4 disasters still wasn't enough. Janis needed to know exactly what was happening inside that room, beat by beat. Janis went through case after case and pulled out 8 specific symptoms. He sorted them into 3 families, and once you've seen the sort, you start noticing it everywhere. First family, the group overestimates itself. 2 symptoms live here. 1. An illusion of invulnerability. A shared, unspoken sense that this group specifically doesn't lose. Ordinary risk-checking starts to feel almost unnecessary. Kennedy's advisors had that one. A superpower's best minds, backing a beach landing against an island that seemed too small to be a real threat. 2. An unquestioned belief in the group's own morality. We're the good guys here. The ethical objections other people might raise just don't apply to us. Second family, closed-mindedness. The group rationalizes away warning signs instead of weighing them. A CIA analyst's doubts get filed as overcaution rather than data. And it builds a flattened, stereotyped picture of anyone outside the group, too weak to resist us, too evil to negotiate with, too irrelevant to consult. Third family, and this is the one that does the most damage, because it's the most invisible: pressure toward uniformity. 4 symptoms live here. Self-censorship. You personally decide your doubt isn't worth the friction of saying out loud. An illusion of unanimity, which self-censorship manufactures almost by accident. If nobody's objecting, the room reads silence as agreement, when really it might just be silence. Direct pressure on anyone who does speak up, sometimes as mild as a raised eyebrow, rarely anything as blunt as a raised voice. And last, what Janis called a mind guard. Someone, usually without even realizing what they're doing, who quietly protects the leader from information that might complicate the plan. They screen out the memo, soften the bad news, and decide on the group's behalf that this doubt isn't worth raising today. Here's the strange part. Not one of those 8 symptoms feels like failure while it's happening. Every one of them feels like getting along. Cohesion feels good. Confidence feels good. A meeting that ends in agreement feels like a productive meeting. That's exactly what makes groupthink so hard to catch from inside the room. The warning signs are disguised as the room working well. Janis didn't stop at describing the failure. He went looking for what made a group vulnerable to it in the first place, and he found a short, specific list. A tightly bonded group, cut off from outside opinion, led by someone who states a preference before anyone else has spoken. Working without a clear process for weighing options, under real external pressure, with no obviously better alternative in sight. Stack those conditions on top of each other and the room is primed. But here's what makes this more than just a cautionary story. The same kind of high-pressure advisory group can dodge the trap entirely, and we know that because it happened. Barely a year after the Bay of Pigs, Kennedy faced an even higher-stakes decision. Soviet missiles, 90 miles from Florida, discovered mid-crisis. Same president, some of the same advisors, sitting around the same kind of table. This time, Kennedy deliberately broke his own group's habits. He had them split into smaller, independent subgroups working the problem separately, then compared notes. No single conversation could quietly harden into the group's only answer. He kept his own opinion off the table early, so nobody could read the room and simply agree with the boss. He brought in outside experts on purpose, people with no personal stake in looking consistent. The Cuban Missile Crisis ended without a shot fired. Historians still study the contrast between those 2 rooms, run by the same man, 13 months apart, working from the same short list of what actually changed. The Marshall Plan is the quieter version of the same story. A major post-war policy built through wide, structured debate instead of quick consensus, and it held up. From cases like these, Janis pulled out concrete fixes, and none of them are complicated. Assign someone the specific job of arguing against the plan, a designated devil's advocate. Dissent has a job description instead of a social cost. Have the leader hold their opinion back until everyone else has spoken. Bring in outside voices who have no stake in the group's harmony. Break a large group into smaller ones and compare answers afterward. And hold what Janis called a second chance meeting. After the group reaches a decision, gather once more, specifically to air any doubts nobody wanted to raise the first time. One more thing worth setting straight here, since the popular version of this story usually gets it wrong. The Challenger space shuttle disaster in 1986 gets cited constantly as Janis's textbook groupthink case. It wasn't. Janis's book came out 14 years before Challenger ever launched. Other researchers, Moorhead, Ference, and Neck, applied his framework to that disaster afterward, in 1991. The theory outlived the man who built it, and kept finding new rooms to explain. So pull all 3 pieces together for a second. The word, the 8 symptoms, the conditions. And a pattern falls out of it that's easy to miss if you only remember the headline version. Groupthink was never about a room full of unintelligent people. Every case Janis studied involved capable, informed, well-intentioned advisors. That's what made the theory worth building in the first place. If you could blame bad decisions on bad people, you wouldn't need 8 symptoms and a list of prevention methods. You'd just need better people. Janis's real finding was colder than that. Put a good group in the wrong conditions, and the very thing that makes a group feel strong. Trust, cohesion, a shared sense of, we've got this, is the same thing that quietly disables its own judgment. And the fixes work for the same reason the symptoms spread. A devil's advocate doesn't make anyone smarter. A second chance meeting doesn't add new information to the room. What they do is make dissent cheap again, after the group's own harmony had made it expensive. Every one of the 8 symptoms raises the price of speaking up. Every one of Janis's fixes exists to bring that price back down. So go back to that meeting for a second. 8 people, a plan on the table, every face already settled before you'd even finished forming your doubt. You don't have to become the person who objects to everything. That's not the fix. And honestly, it's its own kind of exhausting. You just have to notice the exact moment your hand starts to lower before it's gone up. That's the whole window. It's smaller than it feels from the outside, and it closes fast, but it's real. It's yours every single time a room gets a little too comfortable with itself. Next time you're in that room and something in you doubts the plan everyone else already seems settled on, ask yourself one honest question. Are you actually convinced, or are you just relieved that nobody's making you argue? Those two feelings sit right next to each other, and from the inside, they're almost impossible to tell apart. Groupthink doesn't win because a room is full of fools. It wins because a room is full of people who'd rather agree than be the one who didn't. Every single time somebody decides not to be that person, the room gets measurably smarter. It just takes one hand, going up a half second late, to prove the whole room wrong.